Hello and welcome to the Higher Geography revision support for the SQA study notes released recently. This is for the Forth Valley and West Lothian RIC. So the intentions for this video will be to develop our understanding of the upcoming SQA exams and the course syllabus for Higher Geography. And hopefully by the end of the video you'll have a clearer understanding of how to answer SQA questions more successfully. Now, throughout the lesson we'll have these symbols. More commonly we'll see the symbol for listen. Hopefully we'll make it clear to you what you have to do in those slides, but you may also be asked or given the opportunity at least to pause the video and to complete some past paper questions, and thereafterwards you'll have the symbol for correcting your work should you wish to do that. There'll be a couple of things we might suggest you might want to write or copy down for records of yours as well. So the Higher Geography Study Guide released recently by the SQA illustrates some of the other things which the modified syllabus has. There wasn't any really clues as to what's going to come up in the exams, but some helpful hints and tips what to look out for. So the 2022 Higher Geography exam will have two papers as normal. The first paper will be for 100 marks. It will cover the physical and human section of the course. You'll have 1 hour and 50 minutes to complete this in. Paper 2 is different from previous years in that you only have to answer one of the global issues rather than two, as well as our application of geographical skills question, the map skills question. That will therefore total 40 marks, and there's 50 minutes to complete this section in. So paper 1 covers physical and human content. That means that you're going to get at least one question at atmosphere, hydrosphere, lithosphere and biosphere sections. And the human environment context, which means you're going to get at least one question for population, urban geography and rural geography. So typically there's about 5 or 6 questions totaling 50 marks for each of those sections and 100 marks in total. Paper 2 consists of 2 parts. It consists of a global issues question. Normally you have to do 2. This year in 2022 you only have to know 1 global issue, and typically your teachers will have only taught you 1 global issue, so make sure that the one you answer is the one you've been taught. And then we'll have an application of geographical skills question or a map based question. It's not just the map that's important, there's also information in the sources in that question, but we'll have a look at that one shortly also. So here are some of the helpful tips the SQA have suggested you should try and follow. Some of it's fairly straightforward, like reading the question, make sure you've understood what the question is asking you to do. And then much of the video we'll be looking at today, we'll be looking at the command words and what kind of questions they come up with. So it might be things like underlining or highlighting certain words in the question that'll help you. So they've suggested that in a question like explain the strategies used to manage housing problems in a developed world city you studied. The command word here is the word explain, and the key words are strategies, housing problems and developed. They're also suggesting that if the question's for 6 marks, then you should try and write 6 relevant points to your answers. Now, as we go through the video, we'll see what a developed point and a point looks like. So a point will get you 1 mark, a developed point can get you 2 marks. And we'll see what they are like and how much detail you need to have to get a developed point. But making 6 clear, factual, correctly statements should certainly get you your 6 marks. Further tips they have is about time. Make sure you attempt each of the questions that you're given. It's possible to get decent marks whilst missing out a question or so, but clearly that's not something you want to try and do. You want to answer the other questions really well to make up those dropped marks. It's good to leave a few lines after each answer as you go back. I mean, nobody's expecting you to finish right on the last answers, right at the bell of the end of the paper. So leaving a few lines after your answers means you can go back if there is time at the end and reread any questions or answers you've written and maybe add in some more information. And then we have approximately 1 minute per mark. So a 10-minute question should take roughly 10 minutes. I wouldn't advise you to necessarily check after each question how long it's taking you to do it, but perhaps after 3 or 4 questions or after the physical or human section, you want to check just how long it's taking you to complete that so you're not leaving yourself too short of time for the rest of the questions that are there. In paper 2 you've got a slightly different, in that you've got 40 marks and 50 minutes, and I would suggest you want to try and have a few extra minutes available for your maps rules question. So maybe try and get your global issues question done in your 20 minutes, leaving half an hour for your maps rules question would be a good tactic to do there. So we've got 11 different skill question types SQA have illustrated for us here, and we'll go through each one with some further exemplification from past papers as well to show what you're looking at. In skills questions, you should apply the skills you've been using in class. So these are things like mapping, numeracy, and geographical skills or graphical skills. And in the exam, you'll have to look for information in a new context. So for example, OS map of a different place than you have used in class. So you should remember that while the context may have changed, the skill that you're using has not changed. So the application of general skills question, or the OS map question. In this question, often you're given a scenario given. So highlight the key points to show you know what you're looking for from the resources. You should look at all the resources and then go back to the question. You must remember to use all the resources and not just OS map. I mean, it is possible to get good marks without using the actual resources, but the resources themselves that are added into the question are there for a reason. There's no red herrings in the question. There's nothing that try and catch anybody out or trip anybody up. So most or all the extra bits of information that are there you could get marks from if you quote them properly. So here we see an example of that. This is from the specimen question paper released by SQA a few years ago, and you can see here that we've got a graph which shows a population of Sedgemoor district, and we've got a newspaper extract from the Yeovil Express. Now you could get marks for relating your information to either or both of these questions, so we'll look at the question in more detail shortly, but just to illustrate what I mean by this, it says that increase in houses will help relieve pressure on the local housing market. So that's a mark that relates clearly to the population increase, which may have a shortage due to the amount of people moving into the area for the power station. That relates to the second point. And because the population in the area has increased by 18,000 people between 1991 and 2011. So that's just using the graph there properly between the two dates on the graph given. So that alone gets you a mark. So here we have the section we're looking for. It's vital that you take time to be accurate and use good references here. If you have identified places, points or features in the map, use good references. You'll need these because you get up to 4 marks for correct use of map evidence. Now that doesn't necessarily need to be a 6 figures. Depending on what the feature is, it could be 4 figures, but it takes up a large part of the square, or indeed you'll get the same kind of mark for named evidence. So it might be the name of a road or a river, for example, which you can utilise to get your mark that way. So you can answer each part separately, or you can give one overall answer. So this question is always split into an A and a B part for a total of 20 marks. So you don't need to answer A and B separately, you can just give one holistic answer together. And you don't need to worry about which order you put bits on as well. The marker will mark all in one big go. So here is the actual question that we're referring back to from the specimen question paper. It says study the ordnance survey map extract of High Bridge area, as well as the diagrams before answering the question, referring to evidence from the OS map extract and information from other sources as well. It says part A, discuss the suitability of the site shown in diagram 5A for the proposed housing development and suggest any social, economic or environmental impacts this development has on the local area. Now it's a 20 marks, as we just said, you can answer part A and B together in one big answer. You would probably want to try and split your answer up into sections, but you don't need to worry about social, economic and environmental sections individually. Just give the best answer you can. You won't lose any marks if you missed out social, if you missed out environmental impacts. You won't lose any marks there, but it's just a clue to help you get more marks. And there's no need to worry about how the marks are split up. I mean, you get 4 marks for map evidence, but you don't need to worry about giving half your marks for suitability and half of them for impacts. That you can split it up however way you like and just be doing as much as you can for each question. So here we can see a bit of what we're looking at there. The site is located close to a number of transport links. That's a mark, such as the M5 to the east. That's a mark leading to Western-super-Mare, which will allow for commuting. And you can see I've highlighted in bold here the grid reference, which gets a mark by itself. So location is less than a kilometre from the railway station. That's a mark for indicating how far it is. And then we've got the actual grid reference for the railway station for an extra mark for map evidence. This may appeal to a wide range of home buyers who may wish to rely on the car for transport. I would advise you obviously to be a bit safety conscious here. If you are good at grid references, then you might find that 4 is all you need to put down. You might decide that you might want to put in a couple extra just to be on the safe side in case one of them's wrong. But you should not be putting in more than sort of 4, 5, 6, because the maximum marks you'll get is 4, and any more than that won't get you any further marks. So don't go giving out lots and lots of good references here. And names of roads and rivers will get a map as long as it's not in the question as illustrated here with the little map on the left. So our second type of question is called interpreting graph questions. So in the skills questions, you're going to be asked to describe the information from a graph. You should try to use precise figures and trends as well. For example, the question describe the change in discharge level. A relevant point would be there's a slow rise in discharge from 10 cubics at 9 o'clock until 12 cubics at 1400 hours. So that gives us a number of things here. We've got a slow rise, which is the trend, and we've got the time with the amounts as well. So that's really what you're looking for here, is to illustrate all those things. Now you may want to pause if at this point and attempt the question yourself. This is from Higher 2019, this question. It's referred to as, it asks you here to describe the changes in discharge and suggest reasons for these occurrences. Now those in A and a B part you don't need to worry about. Splitting your answer up, I mean, you could if you wanted to. You could have a bit only about describe and then a bit about the suggestion reasons sections for 10 marks, or of course you could just mingle it together. Doesn't really matter. What does matter is you only give us really 5 marks worth for description, and then usually 5, 6, 7 marks for the suggest reasons would be available for you there as well. Take care, we're looking for you to describe the changes in discharge. That's a line graph in this case, not to describe the changes in rainfall. So make sure you read the graph carefully. Make sure you use the information from the axes. In this case, it's the discharge levels on the left hand axis, which we're looking for you to describe, along with the times along the bottom. So those will help you describe the differences or the changes in the discharge. And thereafter, we're looking for you to suggest why that may be the case. There are marks available for suggesting why that's been the case, linking to the rainfall pattern. So obviously after 1 o'clock or 0100 hours, the rain stops, and therefore that will lead to a fairly rapid recession of limb in this case. Now, linking the changes in the discharge level to the amount of rain there is, whether it's lots of rain or a stopping rain, it will get you some marks, but you'll be unlikely to be able to get full marks in this question unless you can suggest other reasons linking it to vegetation type, perhaps near the amount of urbanisation, the stream density of the river, for example. Those things you need to include in your answer also. So here you have some information which will help you. This question we're looking at here is only asking you to describe from the graph, so all we'll look at is the first part of the answer here. You can see that in most cases, on every case apart from the first point I've given you, you've got to give me a little bit about description and also some numbers really. So the first one is the lag time is 5 hours, and that's accurate, so I guess a mark, but thereafter we really need to have some description of trend. So there's a slow rise in discharge, and then linking that to some sort of either the time or perhaps the amount of cubics involved. So there's a gentle rise in limb until about 2200. When the rise in limb becomes steeper, leading to the peak discharge around 85 cubics at 0200. So that's 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's how they would look for you to illustrate those two things coming together. Number 3 is describing map questions. So if you're describing distributions shown on a map, you should try to give place names, for example, cities, countries, continents, and or oceans, and make sure you include examples from different categories if there's a key. So for this question here, it says describe the pattern of ocean currents for either the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean. A relevant point could be in a North Atlantic, currents follow loops or gyres, and another relevant point could be that these gyres flow clockwise in the northern hemisphere. So let's look at the equation and you can try this yourself. So again, as with other questions, you may want to pause it here to attempt this question, and it's fairly straightforward. For 8 marks, ask you to describe the pattern of ocean currents for either the Pacific or the Atlantic Oceans, and to explain how these ocean currents redistribute energy around the globe. Now, it's an 8-mark question, so the maximum you'll get for describe is, in this case, 5 marks. Generally speaking, it's about half marks for describe, if it's a describe and explain split. So 4 or 5 marks for describe. And if you want to pause the video here, you can then attempt this question. We'll go over answers in the next slide. So here what we're looking for, as we said, a maximum of 5 marks for description. And you should include things about the Atlantic Ocean in this case. That's what we've got the answers for. So the currents follow loops or gyres as a mark. They're clockwise in the hemisphere. North Atlantic is a mark. Warm currents flow from the equator towards the poles, and we've got an example of a warm current in the North Atlantic drift. And then cold currents return cold water back from the poles to the equator. For example, the Labrador currents. So you can see how the description in this case, there's no explanation here yet, but the description allows you to answer this question because you made links to places as well as the pattern, in this case the kind of idea of loops or circles or gyres in the oceans. So knowledge and understanding questions is what we're looking at next. This will take up the remaining part of the question we're looking for. So in these questions you try to use relevant details, place names, or examples you have learnt through case studies in class. Your knowledge from things like television news or news websites might also be relevant at times, but generally speaking, we're looking for the general information you've been taught from your school teacher. So the next one is describe questions, and describing questions you need to see what there is and what's happening. If you're describing from a resource, you should include specific information from the source. This should be numerical or geographical information, or it could be words that you have to use as a prompt. So for example, the questions describe the socio-economic and environmental problems associated with housing in Makio or any other shanty town in the developing world you've studied. You should be expected to give some specific detail on the living conditions there. So here is this question. It was from last year's question paper that went out to schools to use as an assessment piece. And we have a picture of the informal settlement in Lagos, and it says describe the socio-economic environmental problems associated with housing in Makio or any other shanty town in the developing world that you've studied. So for 6 marks, if you want to pause the video, you can take this question just now. As already mentioned, you're looking for 6 factually correct statements about this kind of topic. So here we have some potential information you could get a mark for, just to illustrate the depth of knowledge you're looking to put in here. So lack of basic facilities like schools and water, clean water supply would get you a mark. Lack of public utilities like sewage or power gets you a mark. High incidence of disease would get you a mark. If you relate it to a particular disease that is relevant for the city you've studied, then that would also get you additional marks. So that's the depth of knowledge we're looking for in this kind of question. Explain questions are next. So in an explain question, you need to say why something is there or why it's happening. So words like because, leads to, or means are really words to use in this case. The example we've been given in this case is explain the main conditions and processes involved in the formation of a podzol soil. So the relevant information could be low temperatures lead to slow decomposition, and any other relevant points could be coniferous needles and cones decompose to produce an acidic or more humus. Common question asks you to explain the information of landscape feature as well. In these questions it's important to remember you can gain half marks for a fully explained processes, either erosional or depositional processes, depending on the glacial or coastal features you've been asked to explain. And that is only for glacial erosional features and coastal erosional features and coastal depositional features. You don't have any processes for glacial depositional features. So you may want to pause the video here and attempt this question. This is the one which we referred to just a few minutes ago, asking you to explain the main conditions and processes involved in the formation of a podzol soil. In this case, we've given us a picture or a profile in that case of a podzol, and that's because the only other question they really ask you is to draw an annotated profile of a podzol, which we'll look at that kind of question shortly. But to make sure there's no confusion here, they've actually given us a profile, which should be another clue as to what not to do. Look for a simple explanation of the causes. So here, although the word because doesn't come up very often, the word leads to comes up repeatedly, and that's something which we'd like you to try and think about utilising in your answers. So low temperatures leads to a slow decomposition, that's an explanation. Shallow roots mean that limited absorption of deep leach materials, we get a mark. Limited soil biota leads to well-defined horizons, gets a mark. So you can see how there's a clear connection between a effect, a cause and effect in this case, illustrating what you get marks for. So you may want to, if you have it in the equation, pause again here and correct your work. So number 6 of 11 asks us to suggest reason questions. And to suggest reasons questions, you need to justify something that's happening. An example would be part B of a hieroglyph question, which we looked at earlier on. Suggest reasons why these changes have occurred. A relevant point could be that there's a small catchment area, meaning less travel time to the main channel, or the area may have impermeable surfaces like concrete, which leads to a quicker overland flow. So let's have a look at the question and see why it's worded the way it is. So this question is for the River Lerry in West Wales, and nobody's expecting anybody to have been to this part of West Wales or know this river. So that's why it doesn't ask you to explain these changes, it asks you to suggest why these changes may have occurred. And because you're really effectively kind of stating what might have happened, what might lead it to this large spike in the discharge level. So it might not necessarily be accurate. We could be talking about impermeable rock types here, and we don't know for certain if the rock type is impermeable, but we're suggesting that might be the case because that would account for or explain why we've got a steep rise in limb in this case. So a 10-mark question, we're looking for 5, 6, 7 potential reasons as to why these have occurred. Some of which will link to the rainfall pattern, but you'll need to utilise your knowledge of the topic to get other marks as well. So if you want to attempt this question, although you may already have done part of this already, you can do so just now. So here we have the answers for part B. You can see here, hopefully what we mean, there may be a low number of tributaries transporting water into the channel more slowly. It may be there's a large catchment area, meaning that more time is taken in the main channel. Or it might be the fact that there's more vegetation which could intercept the rain. So we don't know for certain, but just suggesting what these reasons might be for the rise in limb going up so quickly. So number 7 is evaluate questions, and evaluate questions you're asked to make a judgment on the success or failure of a strategy based on your knowledge. So normally be one part of a question that has 2 parts. For example, it might ask you to describe strategies used to improve housing in Kibera, and then to evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies. So I suggest what we're asking for you to do here is say why things have worked well or why have not instead of worked, and that therefore evaluate how it's doing. You should briefly describe the strategy or project you're evaluating before offering any evidence, conclusion or conclusion about it. So here we have a question from the 2018 higher paper. It's revised slightly because the mark instructions have changed slightly since then, so we've upped it to 10 marks. It says describe the strategies used to improve housing in Kibera and evaluate the effectiveness of these strategies. Now, you could give an evaluation for each strategy, or you could give more than one evaluative comment on the strategies to gain your marks. So here's an example of this. For the first point about slum rehabilitation, it says there's been planned and managed improvements such as upgrading main sewers to help reduce the incidence of diseases. In this case, we're looking at Davari in Mumbai. However, within the first 12 years of this, only 15% of Davari was redeveloped. So that's a clear evaluative comment on the success or lack of success of that strategy and how it's doing. Clearly, these evaluative comments are very much based on the city or the case that you're looking at in general. So an answer could be the Valley Redevelopment Project, where local people will be moved to high-rise apartment blocks. However, so that's a description of it. Only those who have been in residence in the Valley since 2000 have been eligible to move into these apartments, and that's a comment on the effectiveness of the strategy. So you can put in a description of the strategy and the evaluative comment on it. You might just put in the description and not put in an evaluative comment. You can still get marks for that because there's two parts to the equation. Or in this case, you give it a second evaluative point on it. This guy carries on, the answer in this case carries on to say, other residents will be moved to other parts of the city which will break up communities, and this may result in people being too far from their work. So you can get 2 marks on the one strategy or more potentially if you have a more detailed evaluative comment on it. Of course, some strategies can have good evaluative comments and negative evaluative comments on the same strategy, and that can still be accurate. So part 8, comment on questions. Comment on questions also ask you to make a judgment on something, for example, the success or failure or the effectiveness of an intervention. So similar to what we just looked at, but slightly different. So for example, explain the strategies used to manage land use conflict and comment on the effectiveness of these strategies. So it's quite similar to the evaluative questions we've just had, but worded slightly differently. So relevant points could be traffic restrictions such as one-way streets and limited wait times have been introduced to encourage the flow of traffic. They have had limited success as people prefer the convenience of their own vehicles. So you've got a point there on the first part about the strategy, and then a point there on the second part about the effectiveness or the success of the strategy. So here you can pause the video and you can attempt this question yourself. So it says many gated and coastal areas have competing land uses which can create conflict. Referring to a glacial, upland or coastal area you've studied. Part A, explain the strategies used to manage these conflicts, and part B, comment on the effectiveness of these strategies. Now it's a 10-mark question, so you can answer it in parts A and B any way you like. Clearly the best way to do this is to tell me about a strategy for part A and then comment on that from part B immediately afterwards, and then go through back to the strategy again. So definitely would advise you not to answer this as part A and part B separately, because you'll end up repeating a lot of what you've already said when you come to comment on the effectiveness of the strategies. So definitely tell me about the strategy and then how well it works before telling me about another strategy after that. So the examples here relate to light districts, and you can see here we've kind of highlighted the bits about the effectiveness strategy to it. Okay. So for example, the first answer says litter bins in remote areas have been removed because it is difficult to empty them regularly. So that explains that, that explanation of the strategy. This has been found to encourage people to take their litter home with them. So that's a valid comment about it. So that is definitely the best way to answer the question, by sort of pairing up part A and part B together before moving on to your next strategy. In this case, the one about traffic restrictions we've already looked at. So if you have already answered this question, if you did pause the video in the last slide, now's a good time for you to pause it again potentially and to check your answers and see how you get on. So part 9 of 11 is discuss questions, and discuss questions you should consider different views on an issue or an argument. You can write about advantages and disadvantages, positives and negatives, reasons for and reasons against, or include views that are both social, economic and environmental. So discuss is like a catch-all kind of question. For example, in the question, Japan's population structure is projected to change next 30 years, discuss the possible consequences of these strategies. So they don't need to be good, they don't need to be bad consequences, they could be both or neither. You're not making a judgment on that, you're just going to tell us about what's happened. So relevant points could be the increase in elderly will lead to an increase in cost of pensions to the government and an increased tax contributions for the economically active population. So let's look at the equation and you can have a shot at it. So here's a question, it's from the 2019 higher paper. It's a 9-mark question, and if you want to take some time to pause the video here and attempt the question, you can. The question asks you to discuss possible consequences of these changes. Now, although it relates to Japan, your answer could relate to the UK or any other country, as long as it's a developed country, obviously, because the population pyramid indicates that it's a developed country. In fact, a country that's experiencing an ageing population structure. So the answer must relate to that, but does not necessarily need to relate to Japan as such. So here we have the potential, or the mark instructions for this for a potential answer, and if you wanted to, you can check your answers with what you've got written down. So the increase in the elderly will lead to an increased cost in pensions to the government, an increased taxation for the economically active, immigration might need to be encouraged, which can lead to tensions between different cultures and ethnic groups. And you can see how you can develop a mark sometimes. So although you're going to get 1 mark for a point, you can see you can quite easily develop that point to get a second mark in this case, which is really helpful by illustrating that by putting in more examples, perhaps in regard to the impact on the healthcare sector or other factors like that. So number 10 is asking us to annotate a soil profile. In this case, you're actually going to draw an annotated soil profile. So you'll recall back to the question we looked at for the podzols just a few minutes ago. It actually had a soil profile in the question and was asked you to explain its structure. Here you're asked to draw an annotated soil profile. And the annotations should have arrows pointing to where they are the correct bits to illustrate that, okay? It's not enough to draw a a profile and then put your answer at the bottom. That will not get you all your marks you need. You've actually got to draw the soil profile and then label it or annotate it to illustrate what's been shown. So in the question, which we'll look at in a minute, you could draw an annotated soil profile of a podzol, show its main characteristics, including horizons, colour, texture and drainage, and associated vegetation. So this is the question we refer to. You can see there's no diagrams here because that's what you're asked to do. You're asked to draw a soil profile, so that wouldn't be the correct thing to do for you to put the answer in there. And if you want to pause, you can try and do that just now for us. Of note, there's no need to add colour to your diagrams. You may want to refer to what colour certain things are by writing the colour in it. That's something which you could certainly do because it asks what that's, but you don't actually need to colour it in your diagram. All these answers are generally taken by the SQA and scanned in a black and white scanner, and therefore colour doesn't really make a difference. So here we have our soil profile, and you can see in this case, although there's no arrows here, you can see they have tried in the mark instructions to sort of put it in an order so you can see where it should go. You may want to put your soil profile in the middle of the page. You've got lots of room around about it to draw your arrows and indicate where things are. Some things have got very definite indications of where they should go. So for example, associated vegetation, coniferous forest or heather moorland, that clearly needs to be labelled to the top of the soil profile where the vegetation is. Other ones aren't quite so straightforward, so we'll be able to find horizons, fuse soil biota to mix up the soil. They're obviously not quite as distinct as the way they go as far as our annotation is concerned, so they can go almost anywhere, but clearly you want to kind of put it somewhere close to where that makes sense. And then you can see how the parent material part C is at the bottom, part, the horizon A is at the top, and horizon B there in the middle. That's clearly where they've got to go. So our last type of question is a case study question. Some questions ask you to refer to specific case studies you've learnt in class. It's important that your answers include place names, locations and or detailed examples. So for example, in the question suggest reasons for the wide variations in development which exist between developing countries, and it suggests you may wish to refer to the countries you've studied. Clearly in here we're looking for you to do that. Quite often you might need to be a bit more specific. You can't just give names of countries, you might want to give names of regions, for example, in some questions, or actual names of hills or mountains or lakes or lochs to give that more detail in your answer, depending on what the question is about. So here's a question here which illustrates that. It's for 10 marks. Again, you can pause the video to complete this question if you so wish. It's from the 2018 past paper. It says suggestions for the wide variations in development which exist between developing countries. You may wish to refer to countries you've studied. So you will get some marks for named examples in these questions. Generally speaking, if you've been asked for suggested reasons in this kind of example and you get the case studies, then you're going to get marks for that. So a 10 mark question, you'll get at least 1, potentially 2 marks for case study information. And you can see that illustrated here hopefully. So some countries such as Saudi Arabia, 1 EG mark for a named example, have natural resources like oil which can be sold for generic foreign currency. Now clearly that named example's got to match up with your answer, so Some countries such as Saudi Arabia is a mark because Saudi Arabia does have lots of oil, which is sold for the oil sold for foreign country, making it much wealthier than it otherwise would be. But clearly, if you give me a name of a country which doesn't have oil, then that would not get a mark for an example. So lots of examples here in this answer. This mark instruction, remember, 1 or 2 marks for 10, maybe 2 marks for a 12 marker. If it's less than 10, it would definitely only be 1 mark for your named examples. So that's all the questions we've illustrated that they've gone through in their support documents. The last thing to say obviously is that the exam is not far away. It's on the 27th of April. Paper 1 will be first thing in the morning from 9 till 10:50 and paper 2 from 11:20 till 12:10. So all the very best of luck for you guys that are sitting this exam. I hope that goes well for you, and thank you for listening. I hope it's been informative and helpful for you.